You think you know how sailors live on an American aircraft carrier? This story will show you the truth that reports and news never mention. The fear, the cramped space, the struggle to survive, and the quiet heroism unfolding just beneath the deck. Brace yourself. After this, you will never look at aircraft carriers the same way again. The USS Franklin Pierce had a life of its own. It breathed the scorching air of the engine rooms, groaned under the weight of the waves, and vibrated like a vast steel beast, inside which thousands of people tried not to lose themselves. For Ethan Riley, that constant rumble had long become the background, replacing his mother's voice, the sound of rain, and even his own thoughts. Sometimes, when he closed his eyes, it felt as though the ship was speaking to him, with a heavy, elusive growl. He woke up when someone's foot slammed against his bunk. Not on purpose, just the unavoidable movement in a narrow compartment where 60 men live shoulder to shoulder. His top bunk trembled with every step, every cough, every sound. The smell was suffocating. Sweat, machine oil, damp cloth, cheap hair gel, and metal. Metal had its own scent here, bitter, like a truth left unsaid. "Riley, on your feet!" Maddox's familiar rough voice barked. "You've got 7 minutes. If you don't move, I'll drag you down myself." Ethan climbed down, gripping the cold metal edges. His elbow brushed someone's leg. Someone swore. The tiny aisle between the rows of bunks was so narrow that you couldn't walk through without bumping into at least 3 people. They stood shoulder to shoulder, pushing past each other, changing clothes as they moved, hunched over like shadows trapped in an iron box. He pulled on his uniform. It smelled of seawater and the engine room. For a moment he shut his eyes. Behind his eyelids, another world flickered. Home, wet maple leaves, hot coffee his mother used to wake him with. He wanted to linger in that memory like a child holding their breath underwater, refusing to surface too soon. But reality nudged him forward, and he stepped back into the present. The corridor greeted him with its usual clang. The walls vibrated, barely noticeable, yet constant. He walked, grabbing the handrails so he wouldn't fall at the corners, feeling his heart beating in rhythm with the tools and machinery. Ahead were 12 hours on deck, under roaring aircraft turbines, under the groaning steel, watched by people always on the edge. When he stepped outside, the wind hit him, dry, blistering, smelling of jet fuel. The deck was boiling with life. Mechanics, technicians, signalmen, officers, everyone moved fast, precise, disciplined. Each person knew their place, but no one knew when the alarm would scream. "Hey, Riley!" a cheerful voice called. He turned and saw Leah Marks, a girl with brown eyes reflecting the glimmer of the metallic sea. She always seemed a little out of place, as if she carried a piece of light that had long since gone out within these walls. "You look paler than usual," she teased. "Nightmares?" "Night!" he snorted. "There's no night here, just endless day." "Right, no sunrise, no sunset. Welcome to the underbelly of America." She winked, and, despite himself, he smiled back. Leah was one of the few who could make him forget that he was essentially living in a floating metal basement adrift in the middle of the ocean. But even her warmth couldn't smother the anxiety lodged deep in his chest. That feeling had been growing for a long time, dark and thick like smoke. He didn't know what it was, fear, exhaustion, or a sign of something yet to come. The answer arrived without warning. The siren shrieked, so suddenly that Ethan's knees buckled. Red lights flashed over the deck. "Battle stations! Possible launch detected! All hands to your posts!" the loudspeakers roared. Leah snapped around, her face drained of color. Ethan clenched his jaw. The carrier's rumble rose, like a giant beast roaring at the scent of danger. Inside him, everything dropped, the way it does when you step into darkness without knowing if the ground is still there. It had begun. The red light flashing across the deck seemed to tear the space between heartbeats, and for a moment, everything around, from the roar of the turbines to the distant murmur of the ocean, froze, holding its breath, as if the very world itself were trying to comprehend what was about to happen, whether to continue breathing or to remain suspended in anticipation of the inevitable storm that was about to crash down upon the ship and everyone standing on its steel skin. Ethan felt something cold, almost icy, slip through his chest, throwing his breathing off rhythm. Though he had heard thousands of drills, endless alarms, blaring signals that rattled the bones, this sound was different. There was no sterile rehearsal here, no predictability, no false comfort hidden behind the words, "This is only a test." And he understood, without even trying to convince himself otherwise, that this was real, utterly, undeniably real. Leah shot him a quick glance, a mixture of anxiety, anger, confusion, and a faint, almost imperceptible hope that maybe this was a mistake, a false alarm triggered by a faulty circuit or sensor, but neither of them truly believed it. The air, thick with the scent of hot kerosene and salt, was taut as a string, ready to snap at any second. "Riley, to your station!" Maddox shouted from afar, his voice drowned in the roar of the engines, the metallic clanging of deck machinery, and the shouts of dozens rushing to their posts. Ethan swallowed the lump that had suddenly grown too large to ignore, and surged forward, his boots striking the metal floor with a resounding thump, like a metronome counting down the last seconds of a familiar, ordinary world that was about to vanish in flames. He could hear Leah running behind him, quick, sharp footsteps that drew closer and farther away amid the chaos of moving bodies. He wanted to look back, to see her, to make sure she hadn't tripped, hadn't fallen, hadn't been lost. But he knew that even a moment's glance would cost him speed, disrupt his breath. Every second now was a jewel not to be dropped. The ship trembled, not with its usual deep, almost calm hum, but nervously in broken bursts, as if it could sense the approaching danger, like a beast aware of a hunter's step. That quivering metal sent vibrations up through his soles, his knees, his spine, reaching the back of his skull where everything coiled into a tight knot. A voice crackled over the loudspeaker, hoarse, tense, breaking. "Confirmed launch. Preliminary trajectory. Crossing zone." The words fell onto the deck like heavy stones. No one shouted, no one swore, no one asked questions. But the air thickened, grew dense, as if filled with invisible smoke. Ethan reached his station, grabbed the handrail, yanked the lever, activating the system, and only then, holding his breath for a brief moment, allowed himself to look up, at the dark sky streaked with light, at the planes ready for takeoff, at dozens of people who now looked small, almost fragile, like shadows in the colossal mechanical organism of the ship. Somewhere to his left, Leah screamed his name, loud, desperate, as if trying to outshout the roar of the carrier itself. He turned, too late. A blinding point of light erupted on the horizon. It grew, fast, too fast. Ethan didn't even have time to breathe. The world collapsed. A massive wave of light, noise, and vibrating air struck the ship as if nature itself had decided to wipe it from the face of the earth. The deck beneath his feet exploded, buckled, erupted, transforming into chaos of fire, smoke, and metal. He was thrown to the side, feeling the world contract into a single blinding white circle. And then, darkness. Cold, deafening, heavy. A darkness that promised nothing, neither end nor beginning.
The darkness was not empty. It seemed to breathe, slowly, heavily, as if it had wrapped Ethan in its cold fingers, pulling him close by the shoulders and refusing to let go. He could not tell where he ended and where the viscous, sticky blackness began, creeping under his skin, into his ears, down his throat, burrowing into the deepest parts of his mind, as if trying to erase everything he had ever known, who he had been, what he had felt, leaving only a pulsating pain that pushed out all else. memory, fear, even thought itself. He tried to inhale. The air was hot, heavy, as if laced with metallic dust, and each breath carried the taste of rust, scorched plastic, and a biting smoke that slashed down his throat as though cut from within by fine steel threads. At first, he didn't know whether he was lying down, sitting, or suspended in some strange void. His consciousness returned in jolts, like a lamp with a burned-out filament flickering on and off, until, after some time, he realized that his body was pressed against cold, damp metal, shards scattered beneath his back, and his right arm trapped somewhere with fingers that refused to obey, as if they no longer belonged to him. When his vision returned, it was blurred, like that of a person who had stared too long at the sun and then tried to make out shapes in the shadows. Everything floated, trembled, fragmented into patches of light, and only gradually did forms begin to take shape. Above him hung swirling smoke, white and gray, thick, and through this haze he saw twisted metal beams, ripped cables, sparks raining down like short, angry lightning leaping from torn wires. The deck, the same one he had run across just a minute ago, now resembled a scorched, crumpled tin, impossible to discern where the walkway, the stairs, or the stations had been. A ringing built in his head, high-pitched, grating like an endless squeal filling every corner, drowning out his own breath, his own thoughts. He tried to rise, but his body seemed to have forgotten how. His legs buckled, darkness swamped his eyes, and he collapsed back onto the metal, hot as a furnace, though he barely felt the heat, only the dull pain pounding in his head with every attempt to move. "Ethan?" A voice, weak, hoarse, barely audible through the roaring silence in his own eardrums. "Ethan?" He blinked, trying to focus, and a few meters away he saw a shape, dim, barely discernible, yet painfully familiar. Leah. She struggled to lift herself up, hands pressing into the deck, every breath jagged and painful, as if swallowing shards of glass, yet she kept moving, reaching for him. The fear in her eyes was so pure, so raw, that it sent a chill through him. Ethan crawled toward her, not standing, not walking, but crawling, feeling shards dig into his elbows and knees, every movement sending bursts of pain through his shoulder and side. Yet he did not stop, because the thought of Leah vanishing into the smoky, roaring, crackling abyss was worse than any pain. When he reached her, she grabbed his hand, tight, knuckles white, as if to make sure he was real, alive, not a smoky hallucination like the ones dancing at the edges of her vision. "Are you okay?" she whispered, her voice so weak it was almost drowned by the ringing in his own eardrums. I don't know," he exhaled, lungs aching inside. "You?" Leah shook her head, closed her eyes for a second, as if trying to hold on to consciousness, and looked back at him. "We have to get up." Her words trembled as if afraid they might collapse under their own weight. A distant crash rolled through the ship, so powerful that the deck beneath them shuddered as though someone had struck the hull with a colossal hammer. Ethan realized it was still happening. The ship was still alive, still fighting, still trying not to sink under the impact. He helped Leah to her feet, feeling her fingers tremble, barely holding her upright. Leaning on each other, they took the first step, heavy, unsteady, but alive. Ahead, smoke swirled, sparks flew downward, and something thundered as if collapsing right before them, but they moved forward because there was no other choice. Behind them lay only darkness, and the fear sprawled across the deck. Ethan glanced back again, and for the first time truly saw how much their world had changed, and how much blood was everywhere. Too much. and he understood this was only the beginning.
They moved almost by feel, cautiously, like people in a strange, hostile world made of smoke, fractured metal, red-hot plates, and alien cries that surged closer, then faded somewhere deep within the ship, as if the wounded, torn aircraft carrier itself were still trying to call for help, but its voice choked on its own sparks and flames, and every new sound made Ethan flinch, as though the blows were aimed directly at him. Beneath their feet, the deck trembled unevenly, in jolts, as if some giant hand were squeezing the hull. Ethan, supporting Leah by the shoulders, felt her lose her balance from time to time, her breathing growing increasingly erratic, and a strange, unsettling confusion flickering in her eyes, as if she were trying to hold on to consciousness, slipping through her fingers like water. "Hold on," he whispered, though he wasn't sure his voice wouldn't break. Inside him, a strange feeling was growing. Something important, something enormous could collapse on them at any second, and all this smoke, all this roar, were just harbingers of something far more terrifying, hidden deep within the ship. Leah nodded, not speaking, but her fist still clutched his uniform, as if that grip were her last tether to reality, her final attempt not to dissolve into the swirling chaos around them. They reached the shattered hatch, surrounded by debris, twisted fragments of metal bulkheads, and Ethan crouched, peering down carefully. Below stretched a dark corridor, lit only by the flickering, uneven emergency lights, creating the illusion that someone was playing with a switch, deciding whether they should continue to live or plunge everything into darkness forever. "That's where we need to go," he said, though every nerve in his body screamed that going down meant walking straight into the beast's jaws. If there's a short, or fire," she faltered, inhaling too sharply, a cough doubling her over. "Then we'll find out before we have time to be afraid." He tried to smile, but the smile was as crooked and trembling as the flickering lights above them. He went down first, careful not to step on the exposed wires, sparking as if eager to ignite everything around them. Reaching the lower deck, he extended a hand to Leah, helping her descend into a space where the air was even heavier, the corridor walls hotter, the scent of smoke denser, richer, as if it could slice through the very air. The corridor stretched ahead, swallowed by smoke, and all Ethan could hear was the pounding of his own heart, too fast, too loud, and distant, muted noises, metallic knocks, shouts, crackling fire, as though the entire ship spoke with 100 voices at once, none of them comforting. Ahead, a tiny flicker of light appeared, small, candle-like, trembling in the smoke. Ethan froze, raising a hand to stop Leah, and listened. The silence in that moment was not silence at all, but something alive, full of expectation, like the pause before a shot. "Someone's there," she whispered. "Or something," he replied, feeling a chill run down his spine. They approached, and the flicker wavered, illuminating a body, a man in a mechanic's uniform, almost invisible under a layer of soot and dust, his temple bloodied, one arm stretched forward as if trying to reach a switch or alarm button, but he hadn't made it. Leah knelt, touching his neck with her fingers, gently, carefully, as if too afraid to awaken pain. "No pulse." Ethan closed his eyes for a moment, not hiding the part of him that snapped quietly inside. Not loud, not sharp, but soft, like a thread that had been taut for too long finally breaking. "We need to go," he said, though each step felt like a betrayal to the living and the dead. They continued, step by step, and the farther they went, the more Ethan felt a strange, almost animal tension, as if ahead lay not just new wreckage, not just fresh dangers, but something that would change everything, leaving a mark on everyone who survived the blow. And when they turned the next corner, he realized he had been right, because ahead, in the swirls of smoke, in the red flicker of the emergency lights, something moved. Slowly, heavily, and it was nothing like a human. Leah swallowed hard. Ethan felt his heart drop somewhere deep in his chest. Whatever it was waiting for them, and it already knew they were coming.
Several months had passed since that day when the aircraft carrier, trembling under the blasts and the rupture of its own metal like a gigantic iron rib cage contracting in pain, survived what later reports would call an operational incident. But for those who had been there, it was forever a different word. A trial that could not be measured by damage reports, by the number of repaired frames, or by the sparse military statistics that so often hide the human behind neat numbers. Ethan stood on the pier, gazing at the shimmering surface of the water, which now seemed to him not just a sea, but something alive, ancient and impartial, something that tests people, breaks them, saves them, but never teaches for free. A strange, quiet sensation rose in his chest, as if everything that had happened had finally found its place, like a piece in a mosaic that had long been sought, turned over in the hands, uncertain where it belonged, until finally it fit. Leah sat on a crate nearby, in the shadow of a tall mast, the wind playing with her hair, which had grown slightly longer over the past months than regulations allowed, though no one noticed such small things after their return. Her face, which had once always held tense focus, was now different, calmer, but with those faint, almost invisible lines of fatigue that remain forever with those who have stared into fear and returned alive. They no longer spoke of that night, not because they avoided it, but because each had understood that some events are carried silently, like a scar that does not need constant attention to remind you it was there, and that the body once healed by being braver than you thought possible. Sometimes, especially at night, Ethan still heard that dull metallic roar that had once awakened the ship like the growl of a beast, and he saw flashes of emergency lights, black smoke, and the silhouettes of people running across the decks, each saving not only themselves but those around them. In those moments, he felt something tighten inside him, reminding him of a sensation that no manual could describe, that rare, terrifying yet real mixture of fear and determination when you realize there is no turning back, and all that remains is to move forward even if the path burns beneath your feet. The fleet spoke of them as having performed excellently, praising the crew's high level of readiness and noting their outstanding actions under risk. But those words, elegant on paper, did not convey what truly remained in the hearts of the people. Moments when someone trembled in shock but still rose and kept going. Moments when a hand found in smoke was more valuable than air. Moments when the smallest flicker of light could mean either salvation or new danger. Moments when two barely standing carried a third because giving up would have been easier but impossible. Now, everything was quieter. Quieter than Ethan expected. Quieter than Leah was willing to admit. Life had resumed its ordinary rhythm. Drills, watches, routines, that precise, dry, regulated order that had once seemed unbearably monotonous, now felt safe, almost comfortable, like a heartbeat returning to normal after a long spasm. They sat side by side, saying nothing, and in that silence there was something right, something that required no explanation. Leah broke the silence for the first time. "Do you think someday this will stop haunting us in our dreams?" Ethan nodded slowly, although he was not entirely sure himself, but she needed that certainty more than he did. "Yes, eventually everything stops hurting. It just becomes part of us." She smiled, a little sadly but sincerely, and in her eyes shone that quiet, steadfast courage he had noticed on board, back when, despite the fear, she had moved alongside him, clinging to life as if it were not only her own. The sun slowly sank toward the horizon, painting the water with a soft golden glow. In that light, the aircraft carrier looked like a calm giant, stunned, exhausted, but alive. Leah ran her fingers along the pier railing as if saying goodbye, not to the ship, but to the emotions she was leaving behind. "We made it, didn't we?" she asked softly. "We're alive," he replied, "and that's already more than we could have hoped for that night." And a warm, deep, unexpected feeling enveloped them both, something like gratitude to the world, to fate, or simply to the fact that terrifying stories can have not only dark continuations, but bright endings, even if scarred. The wind carried the scent of the sea, salty, heavy, infinite, and Ethan realized he would never stop returning to the places where life smells of metal and storms, because some places take a piece of your soul, but in return give something greater. Experience, strength, understanding that fear is not the limit. And the sea became quiet. Very quiet. The kind of quiet that comes only after surviving a storm and knowing you made it. You have changed, and you are ready to move forward.